You know that moment when you realize everything you thought you knew about your life was built on a lie? For me, that moment came on Christmas Eve, standing in my kitchen, staring at my husband's phone. I wasn't trying to snoop. I'm not that kind of person. But when Ryan's phone kept buzzing while he was supposedly upstairs with a terrible stomach bug, and I saw Jason's name flash across the screen repeatedly, something made me look. That single decision shattered the perfect snow globe of my life into a million glittering pieces. My name's Hannah Mitchell, and until last Christmas, I thought I had everything figured out. A marketing job I loved in downtown Denver, a modern townhouse in Cherry Creek that Ryan and I had spent years making our own, and what I believed was a rock-solid marriage. The kind where you finish each other's sentences and know exactly how the other takes their coffee. Ryan was the guy who'd sweep snow off my car on cold Colorado mornings before I headed to work, the man who'd surprised me with a trip to Europe for our 5th anniversary. At least, that's who I thought he was. I remember that morning so clearly. December 24th, the kitchen counter covered in cookie dough and flour as I prepared for our annual family Christmas celebration. The Rocky Mountains were visible through our window, their peaks dusted with fresh snow, looking like something straight off a holiday card. My sister Emma had already texted me 5 times about bringing the right wine for Mom's turkey, and I could practically hear my dad's terrible Christmas jokes already. Everything was perfect, or so I thought. Ryan had been acting strange for weeks leading up to Christmas. Little things at first. Working late more often, being distracted during dinner, taking calls in another room. I brushed it off as end-of-year stress at his tech startup. But when he came downstairs that morning, clutching his stomach and looking pale, claiming he was too sick to make the 45-minute drive to my parents' house in Boulder, something felt off. Maybe it was the way he wouldn't meet my eyes, or how his symptoms had appeared conveniently right before we were supposed to leave. I offered to stay home with him, of course. That's what wives do, right? But he insisted I go without him. "Don't disappoint your family," he said, his voice weak but somehow rehearsed. "I just need to sleep it off." I almost believed him. Almost. It was his phone that gave him away. As I was packing up the cookies and gifts, getting ready to leave, his phone kept lighting up with notifications. Jason Cooper, his best friend from work, was apparently very concerned about my sick husband. The messages kept coming, preview snippets appearing on the screen. "Dude, we're all here. Sure Hannah bought it? Best powder of the season." My hands trembled as I picked up his phone. I've never been the snooping type. I've always believed trust is the foundation of any relationship. But in that moment, standing in my flour-dusted kitchen with Christmas music playing softly in the background, something made me swipe open those messages. What I found turned my world upside down. Photos, dozens of them. Ryan, Jason, and their other friends at Vail Ski Resort, certainly not looking sick at all. Timestamps from just an hour ago, plans made weeks in advance, jokes about the perfect excuse to skip another boring family Christmas. My husband wasn't sick in bed upstairs. He was carving through fresh powder on the slopes, laughing with his friends about how easily I'd fallen for his lie. I stood there, staring at those photos, feeling like I'd been plunged into the icy Colorado water. This wasn't just about missing one Christmas celebration. This was about years of little lies, subtle manipulations, and disrespect for my family that I'd somehow missed or excused. How many other times had he lied to me? How many other sick days or late meetings were covers for something else? The worst part wasn't even the lie itself. It was the casual cruelty of it. The way he and his friends had joked about it. Like my family's Christmas tradition was some kind of burden to be avoided rather than the warm, loving celebration it had always been. I thought about my mom staying up late to prepare her famous turkey, my dad carefully selecting wines to pair with dinner, Emma and her husband driving in from Fort Collins with their kids, all of them expecting us, looking forward to having the whole family together. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I carried on as if everything was normal. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, where I could hear him fake coughing as soon as my footsteps creaked on the floorboards. "I'm heading out, honey." I called through the door, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I left some soup on the nightstand. Hope you feel better." His muffled "thanks, babe" was the last straw. The casual endearment, the continued lie. It was too much. I walked down those stairs, past our perfectly decorated Christmas tree, and got into my car. But I didn't drive to Boulder. Instead, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of Mountain Brew, the coffee shop where my best friend Olivia worked. Olivia took one look at my face as I walked in and immediately called for her break. We sat in a quiet corner, the smell of peppermint, mochas and fresh-baked scones surrounding us, as I showed her the photos on my phone, screenshots I'd taken of Ryan's messages. Her reaction confirmed what my heart already knew. This wasn't something I could just brush aside. "Hannah," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, "this isn't about Christmas. This is about respect, about honesty, about the kind of marriage you deserve." She was right, of course. Olivia had always been right about Ryan, though I'd never wanted to hear it. The subtle warnings she'd tried to give me over the years came flooding back. Her concerns about how he'd isolate me from friends, how he'd make snide comments about my family, how he'd dismiss my feelings as oversensitive. As I sat there, in that coffee shop, watching holiday shoppers hurry past the windows with their arms full of last-minute gifts, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, but something else was emerging. Anger, yes, but also clarity. I saw, with sudden, crystal clarity, the pattern of disrespect that had been there all along. The way Ryan would roll his eyes when I talked about visiting my parents, the subtle digs about my mom's cooking, the constant excuses to miss family events. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma asking if we were on our way. Looking at her message, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Ryan's lies ruin another family moment. I texted back that I'd be there soon, just me. "Ryan's sick," I wrote, the words tasting bitter even in text form. I'd deal with him later, but right now, I needed my family. The drive to Boulder was a blur of swirling snow and tangled thoughts. The Flatirons loomed ahead, their rocky faces dusted white, as familiar as my own reflection. I'd grown up in their shadow, learned to ski on these slopes, celebrated countless Christmases with their silhouette in the background. Now they seemed to stand as silent witnesses to my unraveling life. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, the house was exactly as it had always been. Warm lights glowing in every window, wreaths on the doors, the same slightly crooked Santa that Dad insisted on putting on the roof every year. Emma's car was already there, and I could hear the squeals of her kids inside. For a moment, I sat in my car, trying to compose myself. I didn't want to bring my drama into this space, didn't want to taint another family Christmas with tears and revelations. But families have a way of knowing when something's wrong. The moment I walked through the door, Mom took one look at my face and knew. She didn't say anything, just pulled me into one of her fierce hugs that smelled of cinnamon, and home. Dad appeared from the kitchen, still wearing the ridiculous Christmas apron Emma and I had gotten him years ago, his face creasing with concern. "Where's Ryan?" he asked, though I could tell from his tone that he already suspected something was wrong. I opened my mouth to repeat the lie about him being sick, but instead, the truth came spilling out. All of it. The fake illness, the ski trip, the messages, the years of subtle disrespect. As I talked, Emma appeared in the doorway, her eldest daughter peering around her legs curiously. What happened next reminded me why family matters so much. Instead of judgment or anger, I found only support. Mom made hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, just like when we were kids. Dad built a fire in the fireplace. its warmth chasing away the Colorado chill. Emma sent her kids to play upstairs and sat with me on the couch, holding my hand as I cried. "I feel so stupid," I whispered, watching the flames dance. How did I not see it before? "Love makes us want to believe the best in people," Mom said, her voice gentle but firm. "That's not stupidity, Hannah. That's having a good heart." As the day went on, surrounded by the love and warmth of my family, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Relief at no longer having to make excuses for Ryan's behavior. Relief at being able to just be myself with the people who knew and loved me best. We still had our traditional Christmas Eve dinner, still opened one present each before bed, a tradition from our childhood, still sang carols badly and laughed at Dad's terrible jokes. It wasn't the Christmas I'd planned, but sitting there, with my family, watching the snow fall outside and feeling the weight of truth finally spoken, I realized something important.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to face reality, even when it hurts. Ryan's lie about being sick wasn't just about missing one family Christmas. It was about the kind of life I wanted to live, the kind of love I deserved. As the evening wound down, my phone lit up with a text from Ryan. "Feeling any better?" The casual continuation of his lie made something harden inside me. I didn't respond. Instead, I helped Mom clean up the kitchen, listened to Emma's girls sing Christmas carols, and allowed myself to be present in this moment with my real family. The people who would never lie about being sick just to avoid spending time with me. That Christmas Eve changed everything, though not in the way Ryan's ski trip pictures might suggest. It wasn't just about catching him in a lie. It was about finally seeing the truth about our relationship, about the kind of partnership I deserved, about the importance of family and genuine connection. As I lay in my old bedroom that night, listening to the familiar creaks of my parents' house and the distant sound of carolers somewhere in the neighborhood, I made myself a promise. This would be the last Christmas I spent making excuses for someone who didn't value what mattered to me. The last time I'd accept lies in place of love. If you've ever found yourself making excuses for someone who doesn't deserve them, know that you're not alone. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is face the truth, even when it hurts. Christmas might be about tradition, but it's also about authenticity, about being with people who truly want to be with you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to hear what happened next, because believe me, this was just the beginning of my story. Sometimes the best gifts don't come wrapped in pretty paper, but in moments of clarity that change our lives forever. Morning came with the gentle whisper of falling snow outside my childhood bedroom window, the familiar weight of Mom's hand-quilted blanket, and the distant aroma of brewing coffee brought a momentary peace before reality crashed back in. My phone showed 15 missed calls from Ryan, each one making my stomach twist a little tighter. The last one had come in at 3 a.m. He must have finally returned from his ski adventure to find an empty house and a cold pot of get-well soup on the nightstand. The house was quiet as I made my way downstairs, each creaking floorboard a familiar note in the symphony of home. Dad was already up, standing at the kitchen window with his Denver Broncos mug, watching cardinals flit around the bird feeder he'd built last summer. He didn't turn when I entered, just reached for another mug and poured me coffee, adding just the right amount of cream. Some things fathers never forget. "Your mother's still sleeping," he said softly, finally turning to face me. "She was up, late, worried about you." The guilt must have shown on my face because he quickly added, "Not that you need to feel bad about that. Worrying is what mothers do best, especially on Christmas morning." I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. Through the window, I could see the neighbors' Christmas lights still twinkling in the pre-dawn. Darkness, creating little halos in the falling snow. It felt surreal to be sitting here, in this familiar space, while my life in Denver was imploding. "Dad," I started, but my voice caught. He waited patiently, the way he always had when I was struggling to find the right words. "How did you and Mom make it look so easy? All these years, all those Christmases?" I thought Ryan and I had that kind of love. Dad set his mug down and pulled out the chair next to me. "Oh, sweetie," he sighed. "Nobody's love looks easy. From the inside. Your mother and I had our rough patches too. But here's the difference. We both showed up, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard." The buzz of my phone interrupted us. Another call from Ryan. I silenced it, watching as his smiling contact photo faded to black. The photo had been taken last summer at Garden of the Gods, his arm around me, both of us squinting in the Colorado sun. We looked happy. We looked real. "He's going to have quite the story prepared," Dad said, nodding at my phone. "Men like that always do." Before I could respond, the sound of little feet thundering down the stairs announced the arrival of Emma's kids. The quiet moment shattered as Jamie and Lily burst into the kitchen, still in their Christmas pajamas, excitement radiating from them like heat. "Aunt Hannah, it's Christmas. Santa came." Their enthusiasm was infectious, and for the next few hours, I let myself get lost in the magic of Christmas morning through their eyes. We opened presents, exclaimed over every gift, and ate Mom's traditional breakfast casserole. Emma kept shooting me concerned glances, but I shook my head slightly. Not now. This moment was for joy, not for dissecting my crumbling marriage. It wasn't until later, when the kids were occupied with their new toys and Mom and Emma were preparing Christmas dinner, that I finally checked my messages. 23 texts. From Ryan, each one more desperate than the last. The final one made my blood run cold. "I'm coming to your parents' house. We need to talk." Panic rose in my throat. The idea of him here, in this safe space, trying to explain away his lies, with my family watching, it was too much. I must have made some sort of sound because Emma appeared at my side, reading over my shoulder. "Oh, hell no," she said, her voice hard. "He doesn't get to ruin Christmas twice." She grabbed my phone and started typing before I could stop her. "Emma, don't." "Too late," she said, handing the phone back. I looked at what she'd written. "Don't bother coming. I saw the photos from Vail. Enjoy the fresh powder. I hope it was worth it." I wasn't ready to confront him, I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew she was right. Putting it off wouldn't make it any easier. The response was immediate. "Photos? What photos?" "Hannah, you're overreacting. I can explain everything." A bitter laugh escaped me. Of course he'd try to deny it, even with evidence. Classic Ryan, always thinking he could talk his way out of anything. But this time, there would be no talking his way back into my good graces. Mom appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hannah, sweetie, there's someone here who might be able to help." She stepped aside to reveal Grace Chen, our old neighbor from when we were kids. Grace had become a family law attorney, specializing in divorce cases. The sight of her standing there in her holiday sweater, looking professional even on Christmas Day, made everything suddenly feel very real. "I hope you don't mind," Mom said softly. "I called her this morning. Just in case you wanted to talk to someone who knows the legal side of things." I should have felt ambushed, but instead, a wave of gratitude washed over me. My family wasn't just offering emotional support. They were helping me prepare for whatever came next. Grace sat with me in Dad's study, the room warm from the crackling fireplace, and listened as I laid out everything. Not just Ryan's Christmas deception, but all the little lies and manipulations that had led to this point. "Financial records," she said finally, making notes on her phone. "That's where we'll start. Men like Ryan, they usually leave a trail. The ski trip probably wasn't the first time he spent money behind your back. She was right, of course. Once I started thinking about it, there were so many questionable expenses. So many times Ryan had been vague about where money was going. Had I been naive or just willfully blind? The sound of a car door slamming outside made us all freeze. Through the study window, I could see Ryan's Tesla parked at the curb, its sleek black surface dusted with snow. He'd actually done it, driven all the way to Boulder, probably breaking several speed limits in the process. "You don't have to talk to him," Grace said firmly. In fact, I'd advise against it right now. But I was already standing, smoothing down my Christmas sweater with trembling hands. "Yes, I do," I said. "But not alone." Emma appeared at my side, her hand slipping into mine. "Never alone," she agreed. Dad moved to stand by the front door, his expression stern. Even Mom's usual welcoming demeanor had hardened into something protective. The doorbell rang, its cheerful tone jarring against the tension in the room. Through the frosted glass, I could see Ryan's silhouette, shifting from foot to foot the way he did when he was nervous. For a moment, I was transported back to another Christmas years ago, when he'd stood on this same porch, asking my father's blessing to propose. Dad opened the door, but didn't step aside to let Ryan in. "Now's not a good time," he said, his voice carrying an authority I remembered from my teenage years. "With all due respect, sir," Ryan started, trying to peer around Dad's shoulder. "I need to speak to my wife." "Your wife," Emma called out, not bothering to hide her disdain, "doesn't want to speak to you. How was the skiing?" Ryan's face went pale, then red. "Hannah," he called out, "baby, please. This is all a misunderstanding. If you'd just let me explain." I stepped forward, feeling stronger with my family around me. "Explain what, Ryan? The fake illness? The secret ski trip? The texts joking about how gullible I am?" My voice was steady, surprising even me. "Or should we go back further? Explain all the other lies, all the times you've manipulated me?" He had the audacity to look wounded. "I never meant to hurt you. The guys had been planning this trip for months, and I knew you'd be upset if I missed Christmas with your family. I just wanted to avoid an argument." "So you lied," I said flatly. "You made me feel guilty for wanting to leave my sick husband alone on Christmas. You let me worry about you while you were out having fun with your friends. Do you have any idea how cruel that is?" "It was just one Christmas," he protested weakly. "No," I said, feeling clarity wash over me like a wave. "It was just the last Christmas, the last lie. The last time I let you make me feel like I'm asking for too much by wanting my husband to be part of my family." Grace stepped forward then, her presence adding weight to my words. "Mr. Mitchell, I suggest you leave now. Any further communication can go through proper legal channels." Ryan's eyes widened as he recognized her. "Legal channels? Hannah, you can't be serious. Over one little white lie?" "It wasn't little, and it wasn't white," I said. "It was calculated, cruel, and it showed me exactly who you are. Someone who would rather lie than deal with reality. Someone who doesn't respect me or my family enough to be honest." The snow was falling harder now, collecting on Ryan's expensive coat. He looked lost, standing there on the porch where we'd shared so many moments. Part of me ached to comfort him, to fall back into familiar patterns, but a stronger part knew that this moment was necessary. Not just for me, but for him too. "Go home, Ryan," I said quietly. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours after the holidays." "This isn't you, Hannah," he tried one last time. "This isn't us. We can work through this." "No," I replied. "This is exactly me. Finally." I stepped back, and Dad closed the door firmly, shutting out the cold and my soon-to-be ex-husband. We stood there in silence for a moment, listening to Ryan's car start up and pull away. Then Emma wrapped her arms around me, and Mom appeared, with a fresh mug of hot chocolate, and Grace started explaining next steps in a gentle voice. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering everything in a clean white blanket. Later that night, after Grace had gone home with promises to meet next week, after the kids had finally crashed from their sugar high, after Mom and Emma had gone to bed, I sat with Dad by the fireplace. The Christmas tree lights twinkled softly, and somewhere in the distance, church bells were ringing. "You know what's funny?" I said, watching the flames dance. I kept thinking about how this Christmas was ruined, but sitting here now, I realize it might be the most important Christmas of my life. The Christmas I finally stood up for myself. Dad reached over and squeezed my hand. "Sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in unexpected packages," he said wisely. "Even when those packages hurt like hell to open." I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling both older and younger than my years. Tomorrow would bring challenges, lawyers and paperwork, moving out and moving on. But tonight, in this moment, I was exactly where I needed to be. Sometimes you have to let go of the life you thought you wanted to make room for the life you deserve. The embers glowed orange in the fireplace, and outside, the snow continued to fall, covering yesterday's tracks with fresh possibilities. The drive back to Denver felt like entering another dimension. The familiar stretch of highway. 36 seemed longer somehow. Each mile marker a countdown to a reality I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Olivia insisted on coming with me, following in her car as we made our way through the lingering holiday traffic. "No way are you doing this alone," she'd said, showing up at my parents' house the day after Christmas with coffee and determination. January sunshine glinted off the snow-covered flatirons behind us as we descended into the city. Our Cherry Creek townhouse came into view, and my stomach clenched at the sight of Ryan's Tesla in the driveway. He was home, waiting. Of course he was. He'd probably calculated this exactly, knowing I'd have to come back eventually. Olivia pulled up behind me, her presence a silent support as I sat in my car, gathering courage. The Christmas wreath still hung on our front door, a cheerful mockery of the situation. Through the living room window, I could see our tree lights were still on, twinkling away as if nothing had changed. "Remember," Olivia said, appearing at my car window, "we're just here to get your essential stuff." Grace said not to engage in any discussions about the relationship or future plans. She was right, of course. Our family lawyer had been very specific about how to handle this first confrontation. The key felt heavy in my hand as I approached the door, but before I could use it, it swung open. Ryan stood there, looking disheveled in a way I'd never seen before. His usually perfectly styled hair was a mess, and he was wearing the same clothes from Christmas Day. "Hannah," he breathed, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God. I've been going crazy waiting for you to come home." "This isn't coming home," I said firmly, stepping past him into the foyer. The familiar scent of pine needles and cinnamon hit me, making my throat tight. "I'm just here to get some things." He noticed Olivia then, his expression hardening. "I should have known you'd bring her, always filling your head with ideas about our marriage." "The only one filling her head with anything is you, Ryan," Olivia shot back, with lies and manipulation. I headed straight for the stairs, trying to ignore the wave of memories that hit me with each step. The photos on the wall seemed to mock me now. Happy moments that felt tainted by what I now knew. Our wedding photo, vacation snapshots, holiday portraits that showed us smiling, while beneath the surface, cracks had been forming. "Hannah, please," Ryan called from behind me. "Can we just talk about this? I know I messed up with the ski trip, but isn't divorce a bit extreme?" I paused halfway up the stairs, turning to face him. "The ski trip was just the final straw, Ryan. It made me see everything else clearly for the first time." "Everything else?" He had the audacity to look confused. "What are you talking about?" I continued up to our bedroom, pulling out the suitcase from under the bed. The one we'd used for our anniversary trip to Europe last year. Another memory that felt different now. How many lies had been hidden behind those perfect moments? As I started packing, Ryan hovered in the doorway, watching. "You're being irrational," he said finally. "This isn't like you, Hannah. You're letting your family poison you against me." The laugh that escaped me was hollow. My family? They're the ones who've been honest with me all along. They're the ones who showed up when I needed them. "They've never liked me," he countered. "They've always tried to come between us." "No," I said, yanking open a drawer perhaps more forcefully than necessary. "You're the one who came between us. Every time you made an excuse to skip family events, every time you rolled your eyes when I talked about visiting them, every time you made me feel guilty for wanting to spend time with the people I love." Olivia appeared behind Ryan, her arms full of toiletries from the bathroom. "Here's your stuff," she said, placing them in my suitcase. Her presence seemed to agitate Ryan further. "This is private," he snapped at her. "Between me and my wife." "Ex-wife," I corrected, the words tasting strange but necessary. "And nothing's private anymore, Ryan. Not after you shared our marriage problems with your skiing buddies, making jokes about how easily you could deceive me." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing but now saw as calculated, part of his arsenal of manipulative moves. "Those were just jokes, Hannah. Guy talk. You're taking everything so personally." "Personally?" I stopped packing to stare at him. "You lied to my face. You manipulated my feelings. You turned my concern for you into a tool to get what you wanted. How else should I take it?" Moving to the closet, I started pulling out clothes, trying not to notice how our hangers alternated. His suits next to my dresses, a visual representation of our intertwined lives. Each item I removed left a gap, like missing teeth in a smile. "What about the house?" he asked, changing tactics. "The life we've built here? You're just going to throw it all away?" "The house?" I turned to face him. "You mean the house we bought with the money from my grandfather's inheritance? The one you insisted we put in your name for tax purposes?" Grace's preliminary investigation had already turned up some interesting findings about our property arrangements. Ryan's face changed, a flicker of something worry crossing his features. "That was just smart financial planning. You agreed to it." "I agreed to a lot of things, Ryan, because I trusted you, because I thought we were partners." I zipped up the suitcase, the finality of the sound echoing in the room. "But partners don't lie to each other. They don't manipulate each other. And they certainly don't mock each other behind their backs." Moving to my jewelry box, I began sorting through the pieces, separating what was mine before marriage from what he'd given me. My hands paused over my engagement ring, still sitting in its usual spot where I'd left it Christmas Eve. The diamond caught the winter sunlight, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the walls. "Keep it," Ryan said, noticing my hesitation. "It was always meant for you. Like your honesty was meant for me?" I placed the ring on his dresser. "I don't want anything from you anymore, Ryan. Not your rings, not your excuses, not your version of love." Olivia appeared again, this time with a box of photo albums and personal mementos from the living room. "Car's loaded with the first batch," she reported. "Ready for this whenever you are." Ryan made one last attempt, stepping closer to me. "Hanny," he said softly, using the nickname he knew I loved. "We can work through this. Couples counseling, maybe. I'll do whatever it takes." For a moment, I almost wavered. The familiar pull of his presence, the comfort of the known versus the terrifying unknown ahead of me. It would be so easy to give in, to accept his excuses, to try to rebuild what was broken. But then I remembered the text messages, the casual cruelty of his jokes with his friends. The years of subtle manipulation I was only now beginning to recognize. The way he'd made me doubt my own feelings, my own worth. "The thing is, Ryan," I said, picking up my suitcase, "I don't think you know what whatever it takes means. To you, it's just another line, another manipulation. You're not sorry you lied. You're sorry you got caught." He didn't try to stop me as I walked past him, down the stairs that had heard so many of our conversations, past the kitchen where we'd shared countless meals, through the living room where we'd dreamed of our future. Olivia followed close behind, a silent guardian against my wavering resolve. At the door, I turned for one last look. Ryan stood at the foot of the stairs, looking lost in his own home. For a moment, I saw him as he truly was. Not the confident, successful man I'd married, but someone who had built his life on carefully constructed lies. "I'll have Grace contact your lawyer about arrangements for the rest of my things," I said, my voice steady. "Please don't try to contact me directly." Outside, the January air was crisp and clean, burning my lungs as I took deep breaths. Olivia squeezed my shoulder before heading to her car, giving me a moment alone. I looked up at the house, our house, with its perfect exterior and its hollow heart. Like our marriage, it had looked beautiful from the outside. But foundations built, on lies eventually crumble, no matter how pretty the facade. The drive to Olivia's place was quiet, my mind too full for conversation. We passed familiar landmarks, the coffee shop where Ryan and I had our first date, the park where he proposed, the restaurants that held countless memories. Each one felt different now, viewed through the lens of truth. It wasn't until we were unloading the cars that I finally broke down, sitting among boxes of my dismantled life on Olivia's driveway. She held me while I cried, my tears freezing in the winter air. "You know what the worst part is?" I managed between sobs. "I keep thinking about all the red flags I ignored, all the times I made excuses for him. How did I not see it?" "Because you saw what you wanted to see," Olivia said gently. "What he wanted you to see. That's what manipulators do. They show you a reflection of your own hopes." Looking up at the winter sky, so bright and clear it hurt, I realized she was right. I had been complicit in my own deception, choosing to believe the beautiful lie over the ugly truth. But that was over now. As we carried boxes into Olivia's guest room, my new temporary home, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "How are you holding up, sis?" Attached was a photo from Christmas morning, me surrounded by family, smiling despite everything. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just leaving a house or a marriage. I was leaving behind a version of myself that I'd outgrown. The Hannah who made excuses, who accepted lies, who put everyone else's feelings before her own. She was staying behind in that Cherry Creek townhouse with its perfect Christmas wreath and its foundation of deception. The woman unpacking her life into Olivia's guest room was someone new, someone stronger, someone who knew that real love doesn't require lies, that real partnership doesn't thrive on manipulation, that real happiness can't be built on a foundation of deception. Outside, Denver's winter sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Another day ending, another beginning on the horizon. I might not know exactly what lay ahead, but for the first time in years, I was facing it with complete honesty, both with myself and the world. The truth might have arrived wrapped in pain, delivered on a Christmas morning I'd never forget. But it was still the greatest gift I could have received. Because sometimes, falling apart is just the first step to falling into place. Grace's office overlooked the Denver skyline, the mountains a pristine backdrop against the winter morning. 2 weeks had passed since I'd moved out, and each day brought new revelations. I sat across from her desk, watching as she spread documents across its polished surface, each paper another piece of the puzzle I'd been too blind to see. "We've been going through your financial records," Grace said, her voice carefully neutral. "There are some irregularities you need to be aware of." She slid a stack of bank statements toward me, certain transactions highlighted in yellow. Each mark felt like a tiny betrayal, a breadcrumb trail leading to a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. My eyes caught on a series of transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Regular payments, always on the 15th of each month, going back years. "What are these?" I asked, though something in my gut already knew the answer wouldn't be simple. "That's what we're trying to figure out," Grace replied, pulling up another document on her computer. "The account belongs to a holding company registered in Wyoming. Very private, very discreet. But here's where it gets interesting." She turned the screen toward me, showing property records. "The company owns a condo in Vail, purchased 3 years ago." The room seemed to tilt slightly. 3 years ago? But Ryan always said we couldn't afford a vacation property. My mind flashed to all the times I'd suggested we invest in a mountain getaway, all the explanations about being financially prudent. "There's more," Grace continued, her expression softening. "The maintenance fees are split between two parties, Ryan's holding company and another owner." She paused, letting the implication sink in. A woman named Melissa Barrett. The name hit me like a physical blow. Melissa, Ryan's colleague from the tech startup, the one he'd always described as just a work friend. The one who'd attended our Christmas party last year, watching me with what I now realized had been thinly veiled amusement. "The payments," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "They're for the condo? Their secret love nest?" The words tasted bitter in my mouth. "It appears so," Grace confirmed. "And Hannah. There's evidence suggesting this arrangement predates your marriage." The room spun again, memories rearranging themselves like pieces of a kaleidoscope. The late nights at the office, the business trips that always seemed to coincide with ski season, the way he'd discouraged me from joining him for work events where she might be present. "I feel so stupid," I breathed, pressing my fingers to my temples. "All those times he said he was working late." "You're not stupid," Grace interrupted firmly. "You trusted your husband. That's what we're supposed to do in a marriage. He's the one who betrayed that trust." A knock at the door interrupted us, Grace's assistant with coffee. The familiar aroma helped ground me as I tried to process this new reality. Not just a lying husband, but a cheating one. Not just a Christmas deception, but years of calculated betrayal. "What do we do with this information?" I asked finally, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "We use it," Grace said simply. "Colorado is a no-fault divorce state, but evidence of hidden assets and infidelity can impact property division, especially given the circumstances of how the condo was purchased." My phone buzzed. A text from Olivia asking how the meeting was going. Sweet, loyal Olivia, who'd given up her guest room without hesitation, who'd held me through countless crying sessions, who'd never once said, "I told you so," even though she'd had suspicions about Ryan for years. "I want everything," I heard myself say, surprising both Grace and myself with the steel in my voice. "Not because I'm greedy, but because he needs to face consequences. Real ones." Grace nodded, a slight smile playing at her lips. "That's what I wanted to hear. Now let's talk strategy." The next hour was a blur of legal terms and planning. By the time I left Grace's office, my head was spinning with information, but my heart felt oddly lighter. Knowledge, even painful knowledge, was power. The January afternoon was bright but bitter cold as I walked through downtown Denver. I had time before my shift at the bookstore. A part-time job I'd taken not for the money, but for the sense of purpose it gave my days. My feet carried me to Union Station, its grand architecture a testament to journeys begun and ended. Finding a quiet corner in the terminal's bustling interior, I pulled out my phone and did something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I opened Instagram. Ryan's profile was still public, still filled with carefully curated images of our life together. But now I scrolled back, looking at old photos with new eyes. There she was, Melissa, in the background of countless work event photos. Always perfectly positioned, always somehow managing to be near Ryan. The Christmas party photo hit me hardest, me in my favorite red dress, smiling unknowingly while my husband's mistress stood across the room, both of them sharing a secret that made me the fool. A message popped up from an unknown number. "You should know he's not who you think he is." My heart jumped, fingers hovering over the keyboard. After a moment's hesitation, I replied, "I'm starting to figure that out." The response came quickly. "I worked with them at the startup. There's more you should know. Coffee?" 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Sarah Martinez, a former software developer at Ryan's company. Her hands shook slightly as she stirred her latte, her eyes darting around the coffee shop as if expecting to be discovered. "I left the company 6 months ago," she began without preamble. "Couldn't take the toxic environment anymore. But I kept documentation. I always keep documentation." She pulled out a USB drive, sliding it across the table. "Financial records, emails, timestamps of their little meetings. I was going to use it as leverage if they ever tried to prevent me from getting another job in the industry. But when I saw you'd filed for divorce," she shrugged. "Maybe you can use it better than I can." I stared at the tiny drive, knowing it contained yet more evidence of my husband's duplicity. "Why are you helping me?" Sarah's expression hardened. "Because I watched them laugh about you. At office parties and meetings. They thought they were so clever, so above it all. It made me sick." She stood, gathering her things. "Just make him pay, okay?" The USB drive felt heavy in my pocket as I walked to work, my mind racing with possibilities. Grace would want to see its contents, of course, but part of me wondered if I really needed more proof of Ryan's betrayal. Wasn't the Christmas lie enough? The condo? The years of deception? The bookstore was quiet when I arrived, its rows of shelves offering their usual comfort. I'd taken the job on a whim, needing something to fill my days that had nothing to do with my old life. The owner, Eleanor, had hired me on the spot, somehow sensing I needed more than just employment. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she commented as I hung up my coat. Eleanor was in her 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. "More like I've seen the truth," I replied, attempting a smile. "Turns out my husband's been living a double life." Eleanor didn't seem surprised. "Men like that usually are," she said wisely. "The ones who work so hard to maintain a perfect image? They're always hiding something." As I shelved books and helped customers, I let my mind wander through the years of my marriage. How many times had I ignored my instincts? How many coincidences had I chosen not to question? The way Ryan always seemed to have an explanation for everything, always so perfectly crafted to make me doubt my own perceptions. My phone buzzed again, Ryan trying to reach me through a different number since I'd blocked his usual one. "I miss you," the message read. "The house feels empty without you. Can't we at least talk?" I showed the message to Eleanor during our afternoon break. She adjusted her reading glasses, frowning at the screen. "Notice how it's all about him?" she observed. "How he feels, what he wants. Not a word about your feelings or needs." She was right, of course. Even now, Ryan was trying to manipulate the situation, to make it about his pain, his loneliness. The old Hannah would have felt guilty, would have been tempted to respond. But I wasn't that person anymore. Instead, I forwarded the message to Grace and blocked this number too. Then I threw myself into reorganizing the poetry section, letting Frost and Dickinson and Oliver speak to me of truth and nature and the wild heart's wisdom. The sun was setting when I left work, casting long shadows across the city streets. My phone had been mercifully quiet for hours, but as I approached Olivia's house, I saw a familiar car parked out front. Melissa's sleek BMW, impossible to mistake. She was leaning against the hood, wrapped in an expensive coat, looking every bit the successful tech executive. "Hello, Hannah," she said as I approached. "I think it's time we talked." My heart hammered in my chest, but my voice was steady when I replied, "I have nothing to say to you." "No?" She smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. "Not even about the condo? The one you're trying to use against Ryan?" "You knew I existed," I said, the words bursting out before I could stop them. "You came to my home, drank my wine, watched me play the happy wife while you were sleeping with my husband." Melissa's smile widened. "Oh, honey, I didn't just know you existed. I knew exactly who you were. The trusting small-town girl Ryan married for her inheritance. The perfect cover while he built his real life. The cruelty of her words should have hurt, but instead, they filled me with an odd sense of calm." "Is that what he told you? That he married me for money?" "Among other things," she said with a shrug. "Does it matter now?" "It matters," I said, pulling the USB drive from my pocket. "Because I have proof of everything. The condo, the affair, the financial fraud, everything." For the first time, Melissa's composure cracked slightly. "What are you talking about?" "Sarah Martinez says." "Hello?" I replied, watching understanding dawn in her eyes. "Now get off my friend's property before I call the police." She left without another word, but her visit had confirmed something for me. They were scared. Ryan, Melissa, their whole carefully constructed house of cards was starting to wobble. Inside, Olivia was waiting with dinner and wine, ready to hear about my day. As I recounted everything, Grace's discoveries, Sarah's USB drive, Melissa's visit, I felt something shifting inside me. The last traces of doubt, of misplaced loyalty, were falling away. "You know what's strange?" I said, curled up on Olivia's couch later that night. "I'm not even sad anymore. I'm angry. And maybe that's better." "Anger can be clarifying," Olivia agreed. "It burns away the fog of manipulation." Looking out at the Denver night, the city lights twinkling like earthbound stars, I thought about the woman I'd been just weeks ago, the one who decorated a Christmas tree with her lying husband, who made excuses for his absences, who believed in a love that was never real. That woman was gone, transformed by truth and betrayal into someone stronger, clearer, more certain of her worth. The pain wasn't over, I knew that. There would be more revelations, more battles, more moments of doubt. But sitting there in my friend's warm living room, surrounded by boxes of my old life and plans for a new one, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not for reconciliation or second chances, but for the possibility of building something true from the ashes of all. These lies. The night stretched out before me, full of possibilities I'd never imagined when I was Ryan's wife. Tomorrow would bring more meetings with Grace, more evidence to sort through, more steps toward freedom. But tonight, I let myself rest in the knowledge that the hardest part was over. I'd faced the truth and I'd survived. February arrived with a blanket of fresh snow and unexpected news. I was organizing new arrivals at the bookstore when Grace's name flashed across my phone screen. My heart quickened. She never called during business hours unless something important had happened. "We found something in the USB drive," she said without preamble. "Hannah, you need to come to my office. Now." Eleanor took one look at my face and shooed me out the door, telling me to take the rest of the day. The walk to Grace's office was a blur of swirling snow and racing thoughts. What could be so urgent that it couldn't wait? Grace wasn't alone when I arrived. A man in a crisp suit sat across from her desk, his expression grave. "Hannah, this is Marcus Wheeler from the SEC. Grace introduced him. He's very interested in what we found in those files. My mouth went dry. The Securities and Exchange Commission? This was bigger than a cheating husband and a secret condo. Much bigger. Mrs. Mitchell, Marcus began, then caught himself. Ms. Thompson, sorry. We've been investigating your husband's company for some time. The information on that drive. It confirms what we suspected. The next hour was a crash course in securities fraud, insider trading, and corporate manipulation. Ryan hadn't just been lying to me about Melissa. He'd been lying to everyone. Using inside information to trade stocks, manipulating company valuations, creating fake accounts to hide money. The condo was just the tip of the iceberg, Grace explained gently. They were using it to launder money from their illegal trades. That's why it was purchased through shell companies. My head spun as I tried to process this information. The man I'd married, who'd seemed so successful, so honest in his business dealings, was nothing but a fraud. A criminal who'd built his fortune on lies and deception. We'll need your cooperation, Marcus said, sliding a folder across the desk. Your testimony could be crucial in building our case. I stared at the folder, thinking about all the dinner parties where Ryan had boasted about his business acumen, all the times he'd dismissed my questions about his work as too complicated for me to understand. Had any of it been real? What do you need from me? I heard myself ask. The snow had stopped by the time I left Grace's office, but the cold had settled deep into my bones. I walked aimlessly through downtown Denver, past the office buildings, where Ryan had built his house of cards, past the restaurants where we'd celebrated his supposed successes. My phone buzzed, Emma checking in as she did every day. Hey sis, you okay? You missed our morning text. I ducked into a coffee shop, ordering a lavender latte before calling her back. The warmth of the cup in my hands helped steady me as I told her everything. That absolute bastard, Emma breathed when I finished. Hannah, you know what this means, right? He didn't just lie to you about Christmas or Melissa. He lied about everything. I know, I said, watching people hurry, past the window, wrapped up in their own lives, their own truths and lies. The funny thing is, I'm not even surprised anymore. It's like, once you see through one lie, all the others become clear too. Mom and Dad are going to flip, Emma said. Especially Dad. You know how he feels about financial fraud. Our father, with his strict moral code and unwavering honesty in his own business dealings, would indeed be devastated. Not just for me, but for all the people Ryan had deceived and potentially hurt. I can't tell them yet, I said. The SEC investigation is confidential. I'm not supposed to tell anyone except immediate family. Secrets safe with me, Emma promised. But Hannah, are you okay? Really okay? I thought about it, stirring my cooling latte. I think I am. You know what's strange? Finding out about the fraud almost makes it easier. It proves I wasn't crazy all those times I felt something was off. I wasn't being paranoid or oversensitive like he always said. I was right. After hanging up with Emma, I walked to the bookstore to apologize to Eleanor for running out earlier. She waved away my apologies and instead handed me a book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. Sometimes, she said wisely, when our lives fall apart, we need reminders of our own wild strength. That evening, curled up on Olivia's couch with the book and a glass of wine, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. My heart stopped when I opened it. A photo of Ryan and Melissa at what looked like a business dinner, clearly taken recently. The message below read, "Thought you should see this. They're at Del Frisco's right now, planning their next move. Sarah." I stared at the photo, at Ryan's familiar profile, and Melissa's perfectly manicured hand on his arm. A month ago, this image would have devastated me. Now, it felt like final confirmation of what I already knew. My fingers hovered over the phone. Part of me wanted to forward the photo to Grace, more evidence for our case. But another part, a stronger part, simply didn't care anymore. Let them plot and plan. Their house of cards was already falling. Instead, I opened my laptop and began writing. Not just notes for the SEC investigation, but my story. All of it. The Christmas lie that started the unraveling, the discovery of the affair, the financial fraud. With each word, I felt stronger, more certain. Olivia found me still writing at midnight. "Can't sleep?" she asked, settling beside me with her own glass of wine. "Actually, I'm more awake than I've been in years," I replied, showing her what I'd written. I think I need to tell this story, not just for me, but for other women who might be living their own versions of this lie." She read in silence, then looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You know what I love about this? You're not writing yourself as a victim. You're writing yourself as what you are, a survivor who's reclaiming her power." The next morning, I woke early and drove to Boulder, needing to see the mountains, to remind myself of what endurance looked like. The Flatirons stood stark against the winter sky, unchanged by human dramas and deceptions. My phone buzzed. Grace, asking me to come in again. More documents had been found, more evidence of Ryan's deceptions. But for the first time, I didn't feel that familiar twist of anxiety in my stomach. Instead, I felt ready. Ready to face whatever came next. Ready to tell my truth. Ready to help bring justice to all the people Ryan had deceived. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who had stood in her kitchen on Christmas Eve, discovering her husband's lies. This woman had weathered storms and emerged stronger. This woman knew her worth. The light turned green, and I drove on, leaving the mountains behind but carrying their strength with me. Ahead lay more revelations, more legal battles, more moments of truth. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Every lie Ryan had told, every deception he'd crafted, had only served to set me free. In my purse, Eleanor's book sat like a talisman. "Women who run with wolves aren't meant for men who want to tame them," she'd written inside the cover. Looking back, that's exactly what Ryan had tried to do. Tame me with his lies, cage me with his deceptions. But wolves, once they taste freedom, never return to their cages. Grace's office was full of morning light when I arrived, the windows offering a clear view of the city I'd once thought I knew so well. Now I saw it differently. Not as the backdrop to my marriage, but as the setting for my renaissance. "We've subpoenaed their business records," Grace said, spreading more documents across her desk. "The SEC is moving quickly. They think Ryan and Melissa might be planning to leave the country." I thought of the photo from last night, their heads bent together at Del Frisco's. Were they planning their escape, their next deception? Or were they finally realizing that their carefully constructed world was crumbling? "Let them run," I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "It'll only prove their guilt." Marcus arrived with more questions, more documents to review. Hours passed as we pieced together the elaborate fraud Ryan and Melissa had constructed. Each revelation should have hurt, should have made me question everything about my past. Instead, I felt oddly detached, like I was reading about strangers. "You're handling this remarkably well," Marcus observed during a break. "Most people in your situation, they struggle with accepting the truth." I thought about that as I walked home that evening, taking the long way through Washington Park. The truth had been there all along, hadn't it? In Ryan's subtle manipulations, in his careful lies, in the way he'd always made me doubt myself. The park was quiet, the fresh snow muffling my footsteps. Couples walked hand in hand, dogs chased balls, children built snowmen. Normal life continuing while my world transformed. But wasn't that always the way? We think our personal earthquakes should shake the whole world, but they only shake us free. My phone buzzed. Another text from Ryan. Please, Hannah. We need to talk. There's so much you don't understand. I laughed out loud, startling a nearby squirrel. The irony was almost too perfect. Now he wanted me to understand, when understanding was exactly what had set me free. Back at Olivia's, I added the text to my growing document. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment of gaslighting. It was all there in black and white. Not just a record for the SEC, but a map of my journey from deception to truth. You should publish it, Olivia said, reading over my shoulder. Your story could help so many women. Maybe, I said, thinking of all the other wives out there, living with their own Ryans, believing their own lies. But first, I need to finish living it. The night deepened around us, stars appearing one by one above the city. Somewhere out there, Ryan and Melissa were probably still plotting, still believing they could talk or charm or lie their way out of this situation. But their time was running out. As for me, my time was just beginning. Every revelation, every piece of evidence, every moment of clarity was a step toward something new, something true, something entirely my own. The woman who had believed Ryan's Christmas lie was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who knew that the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to face the truth, no matter how much it hurts. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more documents, more pieces of the puzzle. But tonight, I sat with my truth, with my strength, with the knowledge that sometimes the end of a lie is just the beginning of a better story. The news broke on a Wednesday morning. I was arranging travel books at Eleanor's shop when my phone exploded with notifications. The headline from the Denver Post said it all. Local tech executive indicted in multi-million-dollar securities fraud. Ryan's company photo stared back at me from the screen, his confident smile now seeming more like a smirk. Eleanor appeared, at my elbow with a steaming mug of tea. I think you might need something stronger than Earl Grey, but this will have to do for now. She guided me to the reading nook we'd created in the corner of the store, gently pushing me into an oversized armchair. The article laid it all bare, the years of fraudulent trading, the shell companies, the web of lies that had entangled not just me, but countless investors. Ryan and Melissa were both named as key players in a scheme that had defrauded people out of millions. The SEC investigation had moved faster than anyone expected, spurred on by the evidence Sarah had provided. My phone rang, Grace's number flashing urgently. "Turn on your TV," she said without preamble. "Channel 9, now." Eleanor already had the store's small television tuned to the local news. There, on screen, was Ryan being led out of his office in handcuffs, Melissa right behind him. The confident facade had cracked, replaced by something darker, desperate. News cameras caught his face as he was placed in the back of a police car. He looked older somehow, diminished. "Don't talk to any reporters," Grace warned. "They'll be looking for you once they make the connection. Come to my office. We need to discuss strategy." She was right. Within hours, my phone was flooded with calls and messages from unknown numbers. Journalists hungry for the human interest angle, wanting to know how it felt to discover your husband was at the center of a major financial scandal. I slipped out the back door of the bookstore, taking the long way to Grace's office. The February air was sharp with cold, the streets busy with people going about their normal lives. How strange to think that just months ago, I'd been one of them, believing in my own normal life, my own normal marriage. Grace's office was a hive of activity when I arrived. Marcus from the SEC was there, along with several other officials I didn't recognize. They all looked up when I entered, their expressions a mix of sympathy and professional interest. "Mrs. Mitchell, Ms. Thompson," Marcus corrected himself, "we want to thank you for your cooperation. Your testimony was instrumental in building this case." I sank into a chair, feeling oddly detached from it all. "What happens now?" The next hour was a blur of legal terms and procedures. Ryan and Melissa were facing serious federal charges. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Not just the financial fraud, but attempts to obstruct justice, conspiracy, money laundering through that damn condo in Vail. They tried to run, Marcus revealed, sliding a photo across the desk. It showed Ryan and Melissa at Denver International Airport, luggage in hand. We picked them up just before they could board a flight to the Cayman Islands. I stared at the photo, at the designer luggage I recognized from our honeymoon, at the way Ryan's hand rested possessively on Melissa's back. Even in their attempt to flee, they looked like a power couple. Right up until the moment they were arrested. My phone buzzed again. Emma this time. Mom and Dad just saw the news. They're freaking out. Do you want me to come to Denver? Before I could respond, Grace's assistant burst in. You need to see this, she said, turning up the volume on the office TV. Melissa was on screen, having apparently made bail. She stood on the courthouse steps, perfectly composed despite everything, speaking to a crowd of reporters. I was manipulated, she was saying, her voice trembling with well-practiced emotion. Ryan Mitchell led me to believe these were legitimate business practices. I trusted him, just like his wife did. The laugh that escaped me was hollow. Unbelievable, I muttered. She's throwing him under the bus. It's a common strategy, Marcus said. She's trying to position herself as another victim. But don't worry, we have evidence that proves she was just as involved as Ryan. I thought about all the times Melissa had been in my home, playing the role of the friendly colleague while sleeping with my husband and helping him defraud investors. The depth of their deception was staggering. Grace's phone lit up with a message. Her expression changed as she read it, becoming more serious. Hannah, she said carefully. Ryan's asking to see you. His lawyer says he has information he'll only share with you. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately, to never see his face again. But another part, the part that had grown stronger through all this, was curious. What could he possibly have to say now? I'll go, I decided. Not because he deserves it, but because I want him to see exactly who I've become. The county jail was a stark contrast to Ryan's usual sleek surroundings. I sat in the visiting room, separated from him by thick glass, watching as guards led him in. His expensive suit had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit, his carefully styled hair disheveled. But his eyes, they were the same. Calculating, always calculating. Hannah, he breathed, picking up the phone. Thank God you came. You have to help me. Melissa's lying. She was the mastermind behind everything. I let the silence stretch between us, studying his face. Once, I would have been moved by his desperation. Once, I would have wanted to help, to fix, to make everything better. But that was before I understood the true nature of his manipulation. That's why you wanted to see me? I finally asked. To try to manipulate me one more time? No, baby, listen. I'm not your baby, I cut him off. I'm not your anything anymore, and I'm not here to help you. I'm here to tell you that I know everything. The affair, the fraud, the years of lies, all of it. His face changed, the desperate mask slipping to reveal something harder underneath. You don't understand what it's like, he hissed. The pressure to succeed, to maintain our lifestyle. Our lifestyle? I laughed. You mean the lifestyle you built on lies? The one where you used my inheritance to buy a love nest with your mistress? Where you made me feel crazy for questioning your late nights and business trips? I loved you, he tried. No, I said firmly. You loved what I represented. The perfect wife who believed your lies, who made you look respectable, who never questioned too deeply. But that woman is gone, Ryan. And you're about to learn what it feels like when all your lies finally catch up with you. I stood, ready to leave, But he called out, "What about Christmas? You're really going to let our marriage end over one little lie about being sick?" Turning back, I felt nothing but pity for him. "Our marriage ended long before Christmas," I said. "I just didn't know it yet. But that lie, it was the greatest gift you could have given me. It opened my eyes to all your other lies." Walking out of the jail, I felt lighter somehow. The winter sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Wine and pizza tonight?" Eleanor closed the shop early so she could join us. Later, surrounded by my chosen family, I told them about the visit, about Ryan's attempts to manipulate me one last time, about Melissa's betrayal, about the strange sense of closure I felt. "You know what amazes me?" Eleanor said, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "How different you are from the woman who first walked into my bookstore. You're stronger now, more certain." "It's because she's finally free," Olivia added. "Free from the lies, the manipulation, the constant doubt." They were right. Each revelation, each piece of evidence, each confrontation had stripped away another layer of the person I'd been with Ryan. The woman who'd discovered his Christmas lie seemed like a stranger now, someone who had lived in a beautiful cage without realizing it was a cage at all. My phone lit up with another news alert. Second tech executive arrested in fraud case. Melissa Barrett taken into custody after new evidence emerges. The photo showed her being led, away in handcuffs, her perfect composure finally cracking. "Justice," Emma texted moments later. "Both snakes going down." But it wasn't about justice, not really. It was about truth, the kind that sets you free, even when it hurts. The kind that forces you to grow, to change, to become someone stronger than you ever thought possible. Outside, Denver's lights twinkled against the dark mountain sky. Somewhere in a jail cell, Ryan was facing his own truths, his own consequences. Somewhere in another cell, Melissa was learning that betrayal works both ways. And here, in this warm room filled with love and understanding, I was exactly where I needed to be. The journey hadn't been easy, from that Christmas morning discovery to federal indictments, from heartbreak to healing. But it had led me home. Not to a place, but to myself. Eleanor raised her glass in a toast. "To truth," she said simply. "To truth," we echoed, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that the best chapters of my story were still to come. Not as Ryan's wife, not as a victim of his deceptions, but as myself, whole, strong, and finally, completely free. The mountain peaks stood silent against the night sky, eternal witnesses to the storms that reshape our lives. But storms, no matter how fierce, eventually pass. And what remains is often stronger, truer, and more beautiful than what came before. Spring came early to Denver that year, bringing with it unexpected changes. The cherry trees outside Eleanor's bookstore burst into bloom while patches of snow still lingered in the shadows. I stood at the store window, watching pink petals dance on the March breeze, when my real estate agent called. "The townhouse sale is final," Maria announced. "Given everything that's happened, we got an amazing price." She wasn't exaggerating. The property values in Cherry Creek had soared, and despite Ryan's legal troubles, our home had sold well above asking price. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a peculiar mix of emotions. The townhouse had been my dream home once, filled with carefully chosen furniture and color-coordinated decor. Now it belonged to someone else, along with all the memories it held. "Good news?" Eleanor asked, appearing with 2 mugs of her special blend tea. "The house sold," I said, accepting the steaming cup. "It's really over." Eleanor smiled, her silver hair catching the morning light. "Not over, dear. Just beginning." She was right, of course. The proceeds from the house sale meant I could finally move out of Olivia's guest room, find my own place, start fresh. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah Martinez walked in, looking different from the nervous whistleblower I'd met months ago. Success suited her. After exposing Ryan and Melissa's fraud, she'd been hired by a prestigious tech firm that valued ethical leadership. "I brought bagels," she announced, holding up a paper bag from the local deli. "And news." We gathered in the reading nook, our unofficial meeting spot for updates on the ongoing legal saga. The preliminary hearing was approaching, and the prosecution had been building an increasingly strong case. "They're offering Melissa a deal," Sarah revealed, spreading cream cheese on a bagel. "Reduced charges in exchange for testifying against Ryan. Word is, she's going to take it." I absorbed this information, surprised by my own lack of reaction. Once, the thought of their betrayal had consumed me. Now, it felt distant, like reading about strangers in a newspaper. "How's the new job?" I asked instead, genuinely interested in Sarah's fresh start. Her face lit up as she described her current projects, the ethical standards her new company maintained, the mentorship program she was developing for young women in tech. Watching her enthusiasm, I felt a spark of something familiar, the desire to make a difference, to create positive change from negative experiences. The bell chimed again, this time admitting Grace, looking polished despite the early hour. "Hannah," she said, slightly breathless, "we need to talk. The prosecutor wants you to testify." The bagel turned to ash in my mouth. "Testify? About what?" "About everything. The pattern of deception, the financial manipulation, how he used your inheritance. Your story helps establish a timeline of fraud that predates the tech company scandal." Eleanor squeezed my hand. "You don't have to decide right now," she said gently, but I already knew my answer. "Yes," I said firmly, "I'll do it." The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Grace and her team helped me organize my thoughts, gather documentation, prepare for cross-examination. The story emerged chronologically, from the early days when Ryan had convinced me to invest my inheritance in our future through years of financial manipulation, to that final Christmas lie that had unraveled everything. Between preparation, sessions, I threw myself into apartment hunting. After months of living in Olivia's guest room, I was ready for my own space. The perfect place appeared unexpectedly, a small but bright apartment in Washington Park, walking distance from both the bookstore and the park itself. Emma drove down from Boulder to help me move in, bringing Mom's old kitchen table and Dad's spare armchair. "It's like a fresh start care package," she joked, arranging familiar objects in my new space. The apartment came together slowly, a mix of old and new. I hung art I'd chosen myself, arranged books by color on shelves I'd built, created a reading nook by the window where morning light streamed in. Every choice was mine, every detail a reflection of who I was becoming. One evening, as I sat in my new space surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. A text message appeared. "I know you probably hate me, but I need to tell you something. Melissa." My heart jumped, then steadied. After a moment's consideration, I replied, "I don't hate you. I pity you." Her response came quickly. "Can we meet? There's more to the story than you know." I shared the messages with Grace, who advised against meeting. "Anything she has to say can go through proper channels," she warned. But curiosity nagged at me. And finally, I agreed to meet Melissa in a public place, the coffee shop across from the courthouse. She looked different from the polished executive I remembered. House arrest had dulled her shine, replaced designer clothes with simple jeans and a sweater. She watched me approach, hands wrapped around a coffee cup. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see." "Why am I here, Melissa?" She took a deep breath. "Because I owe you the truth, not the prosecutor's version, not Ryan's lies. but what really happened. What followed was a story of ambition, manipulation, and moral compromise. How Ryan had spotted her talent early in her career, mentored her, groomed her not just for an affair, but for complicity in his schemes. How he'd used similar tactics with both of us, playing on our trust, our desire to please, our willingness to overlook red flags. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she finished. "I made my choices. But you should know, he planned everything, including your marriage." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "He knew about your inheritance before he ever asked you out. He chose you, Hannah, just like he chose me. We were both just pieces in his game." I sat back, letting this new information settle. Strangely, it didn't hurt as much as it might have once. Perhaps because I'd already accepted the depth of Ryan's deception, or perhaps because I'd grown stronger than his ability to wound me. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "Because someone should know the whole truth. And because I wish someone had warned me about him years ago." Walking home through Washington Park, I thought about patterns, how they repeat until we learn to recognize them, how breaking them requires first seeing them clearly. Ryan had created a pattern of deception that had ensnared both Melissa and me, each of us playing our assigned roles in his elaborate fraud. The park was full of life: joggers, dog walkers, children playing. Normal people living normal lives. I'd thought that's what I had once, but now I understood that normal wasn't about maintaining appearances or meeting others' expectations. It was about being true to yourself. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and began to write. Not just notes for my testimony, but the whole story. From that first meeting with Ryan through the Christmas lie to this moment of clarity. As words filled the screen, I realized I was writing not just my story, but a warning, a guide, a beacon for others who might be trapped in their own beautiful lies. Olivia called to check on me, worried about my meeting with Melissa. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Do you need company?" "Actually," I said, surprising myself, "I'm good, really good. For the first time, I feel like I understand everything. Not just what happened, but why." The next morning brought another shift. Eleanor offered me a partnership in the bookstore. "You've brought new life to this place," she said. "New ideas, new energy. I'm not getting any younger, and I'd love to know my life's work is in good hands." The offer took my breath away. This quiet sanctuary that had helped heal me could become partly mine, a place to build something honest and true. Spring advanced, turning the world green and new. My testimony date approached, bringing with it not anxiety but a sense of purpose. I would tell my truth, not for revenge or justice, but because truth itself had power. The night before I was due in court, I stood at my apartment window, watching the sun set behind the mountains. My phone buzzed with messages of support, from Emma, from Olivia, from Eleanor, from Sarah. Even from Melissa, a simple, "Good luck tomorrow." In the distance, thunder rolled across the city, promising spring rain. Once, I would have worried about the weather, about my hair, about maintaining a perfect appearance in court. Now, I welcomed the storm. After all, storms had taught me my own strength. I thought about the woman I'd been on that Christmas morning, discovering that first lie. She seemed like a stranger now, someone who had lived in fear of disturbing the surface of her perfect life. That surface had shattered, yes, but what emerged was so much stronger, so much more real. Tomorrow, I would tell my story. Not just for the court record, but for every person trapped in their own beautiful cage of lies. Because sometimes the greatest gift we receive is the truth that sets us free, even when that truth comes wrapped in pain. The rain began to fall, washing the city clean. Inside my new home, surrounded by choices I'd made for myself, I felt ready. Ready to speak, ready to move forward, ready to write my own story. one honest page at a time. The federal courthouse loomed against the April sky, its granite steps slick from morning rain. I adjusted my blazer, a new purchase that Emma had insisted on for today's testimony. Power clothes, she'd called them, helping me choose something. That made me feel strong rather than just looking the part. Grace met me at the entrance, her expression professional but her eyes kind. "Ready?" she asked, though we both knew it didn't matter if I was ready or not. The truth wouldn't wait for my comfort. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, intimate almost, with morning light filtering through high windows. I spotted Sarah Martinez in the gallery, giving me a subtle thumbs up. Marcus from the SEC sat at the prosecutor's table, reviewing documents with focused intensity. Then Ryan entered, escorted by guards, and the air seemed to thicken. He wore an expensive suit that somehow looked wrong on him now, like a costume rather than clothing. Our eyes met briefly before I looked away, focusing instead on the judge's empty bench. "Remember," Grace whispered, "just tell the truth. Your story is powerful enough without embellishment." The prosecution called me first. As I took the oath, I saw Melissa being led in, wearing prison orange rather than her usual designer attire. She would testify after me, part of her plea deal. Our eyes met, and she gave me a small nod. Acknowledgement or encouragement, I wasn't sure which. "Please state your name for the record," the prosecutor began. "Hannah Thompson." My voice sounded stronger than I felt. Using my maiden name felt right, like reclaiming a piece of myself. "And you were married to the defendant, Ryan Mitchell?" "Yes, for 7 years." What followed was a methodical unpacking of those years. The financial decisions, the manipulation, the careful web of lies that had entangled our marriage from the very beginning. I spoke about my inheritance, how Ryan had convinced me to invest it in our future, while secretly using it to fund his schemes. "Can you tell us about when you first began to suspect something was wrong?" the prosecutor asked. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the courtroom's attention. It started with a Christmas lie. The story unfolded. The fake illness, the ski trip, the discovery of the photos that led to uncovering years of deception. As I spoke, I watched the jury's faces, saw recognition dawn in some eyes. How many of them had their own stories of betrayal, their own moments of clarity? Ryan's lawyer attempted to paint me as a scorned woman out for revenge, but the evidence spoke for itself. Bank statements, property records, emails, a paper trail of deception that no amount of legal maneuvering could explain away. "Ms. Thompson," Ryan's lawyer asked during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you benefited from your husband's financial success? That you enjoyed the lifestyle his business provided?" I met his gaze steadily. I believed we were building something honest together. I didn't know our life was built on fraud and lies. There's no enjoyment in a happiness that's based on deception. During a brief recess, I found myself in the courthouse bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. In the mirror, I caught sight of Melissa entering, her handcuffs glinting under fluorescent lights. "You did well," she said quietly. "Better than I will." "Just tell the truth," I replied, echoing Grace's advice. "It's freeing once you start." Back in the courtroom, I watched Melissa take the stand. Her testimony was devastating. Detailed accounts of insider trading, of Ryan's manipulation, of how he'd orchestrated everything from their affair to the corporate fraud. As she spoke, I saw Ryan's face change, the last vestiges of his confidence crumbling. When it was over, when the guards led them both away, I sat alone in the emptying courtroom. Grace touched my shoulder gently. "You did it. Both of you did." The jury heard the truth. Outside, spring sunshine had broken through the clouds. Emma waited on the courthouse steps, holding coffee and pastries from our favorite shop. "Mom and Dad wanted to come," she said, hugging me tight. but I told them you needed space to process. We walked to the nearby park, finding a bench beneath blooming trees. The normalcy of the scene, children playing, dogs chasing balls, couples walking hand in hand, felt surreal after the intensity of the courtroom. "How do you feel?" Emma asked, passing me a coffee. I considered the question, watching cherry blossoms drift on the breeze. "Lighter," I said finally. "Like I've put down something heavy I didn't even know I was carrying." My phone buzzed. Messages of support from Eleanor, Olivia, even Sarah. But one message stood out, from an unknown number. "Thank you for telling the truth. M." Later that evening, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and began to write. The words flowed easily now, my story taking shape not as a victim's tale but as a journey of discovery and strength. Outside, the city hummed with life, indifferent to the small dramas that reshape our worlds. Olivia came over with wine and Thai food, settling into what had become her usual spot on my couch. "I heard Ryan's lawyer is already talking plea deal," she said, passing me a container of pad Thai. "Your testimony scared them." "It wasn't just my testimony," I replied. "It was the truth itself. It has its own power." We ate and talked, the conversation drifting from the trial to Eleanor's plans for expanding the bookstore, to Emma's kids' latest adventures. Normal life, continuing despite everything. Or perhaps because of everything. A spring storm rolled. In, rain pattering against windows that had become my windows, in a space that was truly mine. I thought about Ryan and Melissa in their separate cells, about the lives they'd built on lies, about the truth that had finally set us all free in different ways. My writing beckoned, the story wanting to be told not just for me but for others, who might be living their own versions of beautiful lies. Each word felt like another step forward, another piece of myself reclaimed. The rain grew stronger, but I felt safe in my new sanctuary. The woman who had once decorated a perfect home with a perfect husband was gone, replaced by someone who understood that real beauty lies in truth, even when that truth is messy and complicated. Eleanor had been right that day in the bookstore. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning. Each day brought new discoveries, new strengths, new understandings. The truth hadn't just set me free, it had shown me who I really was. Tomorrow would bring more testimony, more revelations, more steps toward justice. But tonight, in this moment, I was exactly where I needed to be, surrounded by honest love, honest work, honest life. The storm outside echoed the ones we weather. Inside, the ones that reshape us into something stronger, truer, more ourselves than we ever thought possible. And in that truth, in that strength, I found a peace I'd never known in all my years of perfect lies. May arrived in Denver with an unexpected heat wave and even more unexpected news. I was organizing a new shipment of books at Eleanor's store when Grace called, her voice crackling with urgency. "The prosecutor just called. Ryan wants to make a deal." The words hung in the air as I sat down on a stack of unopened boxes. Through the store window, I could see people strolling past in summer clothes, enjoying the unseasonable warmth. Their normality felt distant, like watching a movie from another room. "What kind of deal?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Full confession, testimony against bigger players in the financial scheme. Turns out Ryan wasn't the mastermind after all. He was just a well-placed pawn in a much larger game. I laughed, the sound surprising even me. Of course he was. Ryan had always been more facade than substance, more ambition than ability. It made perfect sense that even his crimes weren't truly his own. Eleanor appeared with her uncanny timing, and a cup of chamomile tea. "Take 5, she said, shooing me toward our reading nook. "The books can wait." I filled her in as we sat among the shelves, the familiar scent of paper and possibilities surrounding us. Eleanor listened with her usual quiet wisdom, waiting until I finished before speaking. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "sometimes the universe has a way of revealing truth layer by layer, like peeling an onion. Each revelation brings tears, but also clarity. She was right, as usual. Each new piece of information about Ryan's deception had brought its own pain, but also its own understanding. Now this, the final proof that the man I'd married had never really existed at all. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Have you heard? The SEC is expanding the investigation. They're looking at the whole tech sector now." I had a sudden image of dominoes falling, each revelation triggering another, ripples spreading outward from that one Christmas morning lie that had started it all. Grace wanted me to come to her office to discuss the implications of Ryan's deal. But first, I had something else to do. Something that had been nagging at me since the trial. The women's shelter was housed in a nondescript building downtown, its location semi-secret for the safety of its residents. I'd been volunteering there for a few weeks, sharing my story with women who were finding their own paths to truth and freedom. Today's group was small, just 4 women sitting in mismatched chairs, each carrying her own version of betrayal and hope. As I shared my story again, I saw recognition in their eyes, felt the connection that comes from shared experience. "How did you know?" one woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you know when it was time to face the truth?" I thought about that Christmas morning, about the moment when one lie had illuminated all the others. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "the truth finds us when we're ready to see it, even if we think we're not ready at all." After the session, the shelter director asked if I'd consider taking on a larger role, perhaps developing a program specifically for women dealing with financial abuse and manipulation. "Your story resonates," she explained, "and you have a way of helping others see their own strength." Driving home through the evening traffic, I pondered her offer. The bookstore partnership with Eleanor was flourishing, but this felt like another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Using my experience to help others find their way to truth. Wasn't that the best revenge against all the lies? My apartment welcomed me with the peace I'd worked so hard to create. Plants thrived on windowsills, books lined shelves in rainbow, order, and the reading nook I'd carved out caught the last rays of sunset. Emma called as I was making dinner, her voice excited. "Did you see the news? They're saying Ryan's testimony could lead to charges against some major players in the tech industry. You started something huge, sis." But I hadn't started it, not really. Ryan's Christmas lie had been the catalyst, the first crack in a foundation that had been rotten all along. Later that night, unable to sleep, I walked to Washington Park. The spring night was alive with possibility, the paths lit by antique lampposts that cast warm pools of light. Near the lake, I spotted a familiar figure, Melissa, now out on bail pending her reduced sentence. She sat alone on a bench, staring at the water. For a moment, I considered turning back, but something made me approach, sitting down beside her, with enough space between us for our complicated history. "I heard about Ryan's deal," she said without looking at me. "Did you know?" I asked. "About the bigger scheme?" She laughed softly. "I knew there were things I didn't know. Isn't that always the way? We think we're in control, in the know, but we're just playing our assigned roles." We sat in silence, watching moonlight dance on the lake's surface. 2 women who had loved the same man, been deceived by the same lies, found truth in different ways. "What will you do now?" I asked finally. "Testify. Face the consequences. Try to build something real for once." She turned to look at me. "What about you?" I thought about Eleanor's bookstore, about the women's shelter, about the story taking shape on my laptop. I'm already doing it, I realized, building something real. Walking home, I felt a shift in the night air, a change, in the wind that had nothing to do with weather. Tomorrow I would call Grace, learn the details of Ryan's deal. I would work at the bookstore, meet with the shelter director, continue writing my story. But tonight, under a sky full of stars, I understood something important. The truth doesn't just set us free. It shows us who we really are when all the lies are stripped away. My phone lit up with a message from Eleanor. New shipment of books arriving tomorrow. Theme is Phoenix Rising. Stories of renewal and rebirth. Seemed appropriate. I smiled, thinking of all the women who would find these books, perhaps see their own stories reflected in those pages. How many of them were living behind perfect facades, waiting for their own moment of truth? The night had grown cooler, but I didn't mind. Spring in Denver was like that. Constant change, unexpected warmth, followed by surprising chill. Like life itself, once you stripped away the pretense of control. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and began to write. Not about Ryan's deal or the expanding investigation, but about truth itself. How it finds us, how it changes us, how it leads us to places we never expected to go. Outside, the city hummed with life, with countless stories unfolding behind lit windows and closed doors. How many other women were having their own moments of revelation tonight? How many were finding their own paths to truth? The words flowed, easily now, no longer a testimony of pain, but a map for others who might be starting their own journeys. Each sentence felt like another step forward, another piece of myself discovered rather than recovered. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, new opportunities for growth. But tonight, in this moment, I was exactly where I needed to be. Living my truth, helping others find theirs, building something real from the ashes of beautiful lies. The night deepened around me as I wrote, but I felt more awake than ever. This was what clarity felt like. Not the harsh light of exposure, but the gentle dawn of understanding. Each word was another step away from the woman who had believed in perfect lies, and toward someone stronger, truer, more real. Spring bloomed outside my window, promising renewal, while inside, my own story continued to unfold. Not as Ryan's wife, not as a victim of deception, but as myself. Finally, completely, truthfully myself. Summer descended on Denver with unexpected ferocity, the June heat turning the city into a shimmering mirage. I stood in the community center's newly renovated conference room, surrounded by women who had come to hear about financial independence and emotional healing. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, I had been the one needing these lessons. Financial abuse often hides behind luxury, I explained, gesturing to the PowerPoint slide Grace had helped me create. Sometimes the prettiest cages are the hardest to recognize. The room was full, every chair occupied by women of varying ages and backgrounds. Some took careful notes, others just listened intently, but all of them shared a common thread: the desire to reclaim their power from those who had taken it. Maria, a quiet woman in her 40s, raised her hand. But how do you start over when everything you thought you knew turns out to be a lie? The question hung in the air, heavy, with shared experience. Through the window, I could see the mountains in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped despite the summer heat. They had become my touchstone, a reminder that some things remain true and unchanging. You start with one truth, I said finally. One small piece of reality that you know is absolutely yours, and you build from there. After the session, Sarah lingered to help me pack up. She'd become a regular at these workshops, offering her expertise on corporate manipulation and whistleblower protection. The tech industry was still reeling from the revelations that had started with Ryan's case. The SEC announced 3 more indictments today, she mentioned, stacking chairs. The ripple effect keeps growing. I nodded, thinking of the dominoes that had started falling that Christmas morning. What had seemed like a personal betrayal had unveiled a web of corporate corruption that stretched across the industry. My phone buzzed. Eleanor texting about a special delivery at the bookstore. We'd recently expanded the self-help section to include resources for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal. The books kept selling out faster than we could stock them, The drive to the bookstore took me past my old neighborhood in Cherry Creek. The townhouse had new owners now, a young family who had painted the door a cheerful yellow. I felt no pang of loss as I passed, that life belonged to a different person. Eleanor was arranging a window display when I arrived, carefully positioning books about transformation and renewal. She'd developed a sixth sense for what our customers needed, often before they knew themselves. "Look what arrived," she said, gesturing to a box on the counter. Inside was the first printed copy of my book, Beautiful Lies, A Story of Truth and Freedom. The cover was simple but striking, a shattered mirror reflecting multiple versions of reality. Holding it felt surreal, like touching a piece of my own transformation made tangible. "The publisher wants you to do a reading next month," Eleanor mentioned casually, though her proud smile gave her away. "They think your story could help a lot of people." A bell chimed as Olivia burst in, waving her phone excitedly. "Have you seen the news? Ryan's testimony just brought down the CEO of Tech Vantage. It's all over the financial channels. I hadn't been following the case closely anymore, too focused on building my new life to dwell on the destruction of my old one. But curiosity made me check the headlines. The story was bigger than I'd imagined. Ryan's revelations had exposed a massive fraud scheme involving multiple tech companies, fake valuations, and millions in stolen investor funds. The perfect facades of Silicon Valley were crumbling, revealing rot at their foundations. Your ex-husband might actually end up being the hero of this story, Olivia mused, in a weird, accidental way. I shook my head, remembering the calculated cruelty of his Christmas deception. There are no heroes in this story, just people making choices and other people dealing with the consequences. The afternoon sun streamed through the bookstore windows, creating patterns on the wooden floors. A young woman browsed the self-help section, her body language speaking of recent hurt and hesitation. I recognized that posture. I'd worn it myself not so long ago. Approaching her carefully, I asked if she needed help finding anything. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands twisting a tissue. "I just discovered my partner's been lying about." "Everything," she whispered. "I don't even know where to start." Without hesitation, I pulled my book from the counter and handed it to her. "Start here, and come to our workshop next Tuesday. You're not alone in this." Later that evening, I met Grace for dinner at our favorite rooftop restaurant. The city spread out below us, a tapestry of lights and possibilities. "The prosecutor wants to know if you'll make a victim impact statement at Ryan's sentencing," she mentioned between bites of salmon. "It could influence the judge's decision." I considered this, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I'm not a victim anymore," I said finally. "And my impact statement is already out there. In every woman I help, every story I share, every truth I speak." Grace smiled, understanding. "You've built something remarkable from all this. I know. Most people would have just tried to move on. But moving on wasn't enough. The truth had set me free, yes, but it had also given me a purpose. Every woman who found strength through my story, every person who recognized their own beautiful lies and chose truth instead, they were part of a larger transformation." My phone lit up with a message from Melissa, now serving her reduced sentence. "Your book arrived in the prison library today. The women here. They need this. Thank you." Even in prison, she was finding her own way to make amends, working with inmates on financial literacy and emotional healing. Another ripple in the expanding circle of change. The night air had cooled by the time I walked home through Washington Park. The paths were busy with joggers and dog walkers, people living their normal lives unaware that somewhere, someone's world might be unraveling in exactly the way they needed. In my apartment, the manuscript of my second book waited on my desk. This one was different. Not just my story, but a guide for others navigating their way from beautiful lies to difficult truths. Each chapter was built from the experiences shared in workshops, from tears and triumphs and tiny steps toward freedom. Emma called as I was settling in to write, her voice excited. Dad's telling everyone at his office about his daughter, the author. I think he's ordered a dozen copies to give away. I laughed, remembering how my father had stood by me through everything, his quiet strength, the foundation I could build upon. Tell him to save some for the official release. The words flowed easily now, each sentence informed by months of helping others find their way to truth. Outside, the city hummed with life, with countless stories waiting to be transformed. A cool breeze drifted through my open window, carrying the scent of summer flowers. On my bookshelf, that first Christmas card from Ryan sat as a reminder, not of pain now, but of awakening. One small lie had unlocked a door to truth, not just for me but for others walking similar paths. Tomorrow would bring another workshop, more stories to hear, more truths to witness. But tonight, I wrote for all the women still living behind. Perfect facades, waiting for their moment of clarity. The truth I had learned was like water. It found its way through any crack, no matter how small. And once it started flowing, it could reshape entire landscapes. Summer stars appeared one by one above the city, witnesses to countless transformations. Somewhere out there, another woman might be facing her first moment of truth, taking her first step toward freedom. My story was just one drop in an ocean of change, but sometimes a single drop was all it took to start a wave. And waves, given time and truth, could reshape entire shorelines. The late July evening hummed with anticipation as I stood at the podium in Eleanor's bookstore, facing a crowd that spilled out onto the sidewalk. Launch day had arrived with a wave of media attention I hadn't expected. My story, it seemed, had struck a chord far beyond Denver. Reality often arrives disguised as catastrophe, I began, reading from my book's opening chapter. The faces before me were a sea of recognition and hope. Some nodded, others wiped away tears, but all of them understood the weight of those words. Among the crowd, I spotted familiar faces. Emma beaming proudly, Olivia recording everything on her phone, Grace looking elegant as ever in her court-ready suit. But it was the strangers who caught my attention most. Women clutching copies of the book like lifelines, their eyes reflecting stories yet untold. A reporter from the Denver Post raised her hand during the Q&A. Your book goes beyond personal. Memoir into a broader examination of financial abuse and corporate fraud. Was that always the intention? The question made me pause, considering the journey that had led me here. Truth doesn't exist in isolation, I replied. My personal story was just the beginning. What I discovered was a pattern of deception that extended far beyond my marriage. Another hand rose, a young woman in the back, her voice trembling slightly. How do you trust again? After discovering everything was a lie? The room fell silent, waiting. Through the store windows, I could see the sun setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of truth and possibility. You start by trusting yourself, I said finally. The voice inside that you silenced, the instincts you ignored, they were right all along. Listen to them now. After the formal presentation, I signed books and listened to whispered confessions. Each woman who approached had her own version of beautiful lies, her own moment of awakening. Some were just beginning their journey. Others were further along the path to truth. Sarah appeared as the crowd thinned, holding up her phone. The SEC just announced another round of indictments. Your book's timing couldn't be better. The corporate fraud investigation had expanded beyond Denver's tech sector, revealing a nationwide pattern of deception. Ryan's testimony had been just the first domino in a cascade of revelations that was still unfolding. Eleanor approached with a cup of tea and a proud smile. We've sold out completely. Even the emergency shipment from the publisher is gone. She gestured to the empty shelves where my book had been displayed. But more importantly, look at their faces as they leave. they're different than when they came in. She was right. Each person walking out carried more than just a book. They carried permission to question their own beautiful lies, to seek their own difficult truths. Later that night, as we cleaned up the shop, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. A photo appeared, my book on a metal shelf, the prison library stamp visible on its spine. Below it, Melissa had written, "Your words are reaching. Places you never imagined." The next morning brought a different kind of revelation. The women's shelter where I volunteered had received an anonymous donation, enough to fund our financial independence program for a year. The timing seemed more than coincidental. Grace confirmed my suspicions when I called her. It came through. "Melissa's attorney," she said. "Apparently, she's liquidating her assets while she serves her sentence, making amends in her own way." The summer heat had turned the city into a shimmering mirage as I drove to my next speaking engagement. A corporate HR department had invited me to address their employees about recognizing financial abuse and manipulation. It was the third such request this week. The conference room was packed, faces turned expectantly toward me. These weren't just victims seeking help. These were professionals learning to recognize and prevent abuse within their own spheres of influence. "Deception doesn't always announce itself," I began. "Sometimes it arrives wearing success like a designer suit, carrying confidence like a briefcase full of lies." A woman in the front row nodded vigorously, pen poised over her notepad. Later, she would tell me about her own suspicions regarding a colleague's behavior, how my words had given her the courage to report what she'd observed. The ripples kept spreading, each truth touching another life, each story encouraging another voice to speak. My inbox filled with messages from readers around the country, each sharing their moment of awakening, their first step toward freedom. Back at the bookstore, Eleanor had given me a small office, a place to write, to meet privately with women who needed more than just a book. The walls were lined with resources, legal aid information, financial planning guides, contact numbers for support services. A soft knock interrupted my writing. A woman stood in the doorway, clutching my book, her hands shaking slightly. "I read it in one night," she said. "I couldn't stop. It was like reading my own story." We talked for hours, her words tumbling out like water breaking through a dam. Her husband's financial control, his emotional manipulation, the perfect facade they maintained for their social circle. She hadn't known what to call it until she read my book. As she left, armed with resources and referrals, she turned back. "You know what the strangest part is? Last Christmas, when my husband said he was too sick to visit my family, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know I was allowed to question it." The parallels hit me like a physical force. How many women were out there, living through their own versions of that Christmas morning? How many were waiting for permission to see the truth? Evening found me in Washington Park, walking familiar paths as the day's heat softened into twilight. My phone buzzed with updates. More book orders, more speaking requests, more messages from readers finding their way to truth. Emma's name flashed on the screen. "Dad's work is using your book in their corporate ethics training," she reported excitedly. "He's so proud he can barely contain himself." The pride in her voice warmed me more than any summer evening could. My family had been my foundation through everything, their love a constant truth I could build upon. A group of women jogged past, their conversation drifting back to me. One was describing my book to the others, her words passionate and urgent. Another ripple, another truth taking root. Back home, I opened my laptop to work on the second book. This one was different, a practical guide for women navigating their way from beautiful lies to difficult truths. Each chapter was built from real experiences, real victories, real transformations. The night deepened around me as I wrote, the city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there, women were reading my words by lamplight, recognizing their own stories, finding their own courage. My phone lit up with a final message for the day, a photo from the women's shelter. They'd started a book club, my book open on their table, faces bright with recognition and hope. This, I realized, was the true power of truth, not just in its ability to set us free, but in its capacity to light the way for others. Each story shared was a lantern in the darkness, guiding another soul toward dawn. The summer night wrapped around me like a promise as I continued writing, adding another voice to the chorus of truth. Outside my window, the city hummed with untold stories waiting to emerge, with countless beautiful lies waiting to transform into difficult but liberating truths. The courtroom fell silent as the judge prepared to deliver Ryan's sentence. August. Sunshine streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden benches. A year had passed since that Christmas morning, when one small lie had unraveled an entire tapestry of deception. I sat between Grace and Emma, my hands steady, in my lap. Ryan stood at the defendant's table, shoulders slumped in his designer suit that somehow seemed to hang wrong on his frame now. The man who had once towered over my life looked smaller somehow, diminished by truth. Before I deliver the sentence, the judge began, I want to acknowledge the broader impact of this case. What began as a domestic deception revealed systemic fraud that affected thousands of investors, employees, and families. My gaze drifted to Melissa, sitting with her own legal team. She would be sentenced next month, her cooperation earning her a lighter punishment. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave me a slight nod. We had both found our own paths to truth, though they had led us to very different destinations. The sentence came down like a hammer, 15 years. Not just for the corporate fraud, but for years of financial abuse, for the manipulation of trust, for the calculated deception that had characterized not just his business dealings, but his personal relationships. As the guards led Ryan away, he turned to look at me one last time. I met his gaze steadily, feeling neither triumph nor pain. The woman who had once built her life around his lies was gone, transformed by truth into someone stronger, someone real. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered with their microphones and cameras. Grace fielded their questions while I stood with my family, embracing the simple truth of their love. Ready for tonight? Emma asked, linking her arm through mine as we walked down the courthouse steps. Tonight. The thought brought a smile to my face. Eleanor's bookstore was hosting a special event, not just a reading, but the launch of a new program we'd developed together. A series of workshops designed to help women recognize and escape financial abuse, to transform their own beautiful lies into powerful truths. The Denver afternoon bloomed golden around us as we drove to Washington Park for a quiet moment before the evening's events. The park had become my sanctuary during the past year, its paths witnessing my transformation from victim to survivor to advocate. Olivia met us there, bringing coffee and her unwavering support. The shelter called, she reported. They're sending 10 women to tonight's workshop, and 3 more bookstores in different states want to start similar programs. The ripples kept spreading, each truth touching another life, each story encouraging another voice to speak. My inbox was full of messages from readers around the country, women finding their own courage through shared experience. As the sun began to set, we made our way to the bookstore. Eleanor had transformed the space, arranging chairs in a circle rather than rows. This wasn't about one person speaking to many. It was about creating a space where every truth could be heard. Women began arriving early, some clutching copies of my book, others simply carrying the weight of their own unspoken stories. Each face held a different version of the same question. How do we find truth in a world built on beautiful lies? Sarah arrived with a group from her new tech company where she'd implemented ethics training programs inspired by our story. The corporate world was slowly changing, one truth at a time. "Before we begin," I said once everyone was seated, "I want you to know something. Whatever brought you here tonight, whatever lie you're questioning, whatever truth you're seeking, you're not alone. And you're stronger than you know." The stories began to flow, each woman finding her voice in the safe space we'd created. Some spoke of financial control disguised as protection, others of emotional manipulation masked as love. Each truth shared was another crack in the foundation of silence that perpetuated abuse. Through the bookstore window, I could see the mountains in the distance, their peaks painted pink by the setting sun. They had been my constant throughout this journey, a reminder that some truths stand unchanging against all attempts at deception. As the workshop wound down, a young woman approached me, tears streaming down her face. "My husband told me he was too sick to come to my sister's wedding next month," she said. "I didn't know why that felt wrong until I heard your story." I hugged her close, feeling the trembling of awakening truth in her body. Another Christmas lie exposed, another life about to transform. Eleanor appeared with tea and quiet wisdom, as she always did in moments of need. "Truth is like light," she said to the group. "It doesn't just illuminate the darkness, it shows us the way forward." The night deepened around us as women lingered, exchanging numbers and promises to meet again. This was the real power of truth, not just in its ability to set us free, but in its capacity to connect us to others walking similar paths. Later, as we cleared away the chairs and restored the bookstore to its usual order, my phone lit up with a message from Grace. The SEC investigation had led to more indictments, more revelations, more truth breaking through the perfect facades of corporate America. "You started something," Olivia said, reading over my shoulder. "All because you were brave enough to question one Christmas lie." But it wasn't just about bravery, I realized. It was about recognition, seeing the truth that had been there all along, waiting to be acknowledged. Every woman in that room tonight had her own moment of recognition waiting to happen. The city lights twinkled beyond the bookstore windows as we finished cleaning up. Emma hugged me goodbye, heading back to Boulder with stories to share with our parents. Olivia lingered, helping Eleanor close up shop. In the quiet moment before leaving, I stood in my small office, looking at the wall of resources we'd compiled: legal aid information, financial planning guides, support group contacts. Each piece represented another tool for truth, another way forward for women seeking freedom. My second book waited on my desk, its manuscript nearly complete. This one was different, not just my story, but a guidebook for others navigating their way from beautiful lies to difficult truths. Each chapter was built from real experiences, real victories, real transformations. The night air was cool as I walked home through the quiet streets. Summer was waning, autumn approaching with its promise of change. Soon another Christmas would come, but this one would be different. This one would be built on truth. My apartment welcomed me with the peace I'd worked so hard to create. Plants thrived on windowsills, books lined shelves in rainbow order, and the reading nook I'd carved out caught the last light of day. Tomorrow would bring more stories, more truths, more women finding their way to freedom. But tonight, in this moment, I was exactly where I needed to be, living my truth, helping others find theirs, building something real from the ashes of beautiful lies. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.